The game Persona 5 is about the phantom thieves aiming to rectify society, gifted with supernatural abilities. They infiltrate the palaces of rotten adults in order to steal their heart. This in turn makes them admit to their crimes, and as such brings them to justice. This all happens within the metaverse, a realm whose shape manifests according to the cognition of people. In Persona, cognition does not refer to the literal awareness of reality. Instead, cognition is the manner in which people interpret reality according to their own values and sense of life. In other words, Persona's notion of cognition is how the world appears to them, the observer. Cognition is what they hold the world to be like. A palace is born whenever an individual's cognition becomes warped to the point of being entirely incongruent with reality. Otherwise put, the interpretation of reality is completely at odds with actual reality. Take the first section of the game as example. Shido's palace is an enormous castle which he rules over like an absolute monarch. In reality, he is just a normal PE teacher at a high school who abuses his students. The game's plot follows a series of palace infiltrations that all culminate into one big conspiracy.
Jesus Christ!
Although the morality of forcefully changing the hearts of evildoers is raised, the fact that the palace rulers are evil and are deserving of justice is held as true throughout the entire game. However, all of that changes with the royal version of the game, where normally the game would come to a conclusion. The royal version adds a third trimester and an entirely new palace to explore, and with it raises not only complex moral questions about the nature of grief and suffering, but also about the justness of reality. From here on out, spoilers for the entirety of the third semester will follow. If you have not yet played or finished Persona 5 but have an interest in doing so, please stop watching this video now and return when you have finished the game. Otherwise, please proceed. Following the destruction of Jaudebarov and the presumed disappearance of the metaverse, the player character and a revived Akechi discover that instead of having disappeared, the real world and the cognitive world have fused together. And after a brief investigation, it turns out that Sujin Academy's former counselor, Maruki, is the cause of this merging. Due to the Phantom Thief's trust in him, Maruki gained the control over this merged dimension and was allowed to shape it according to his own ideals. Accordingly, he immediately realized his own vision for reality, namely, to create one where no one needs to suffer. At the same time that Maruki awakened to his persona, he also unlocked his power of actualization. At first, this ability enabled Maruki to alter the cognition of traumatized people in order to erase the reason for that trauma from their consciousness. After reality's merging with mementos, he became able to not only warp the cognition of people, but the cognition of reality as such, allowing him to make real or actualize the desires in someone's heart. This ability ranges from simply actualizing the last part of someone's collection to bringing back a dead family member. The overlapping theme is that Maruki's actualization allows him to manifest someone vicious in spite of reality and in spite of history. Maruki makes abundantly clear what he envisages for his new power. Throughout the story, he calls reality merciless, cruel, unfair, harsh. He says it's filled with suffering and pain. With his actualization, Maruki wants to create his own Eden and fix reality by ending all suffering. This he accomplishes by metaphysically undoing the reason for the trauma. Man's suffering is ended because Maruki prevents him from recalling why there was suffering in the first place. In other words, actualization forms an alternate reality in which struggle was never necessary, in which the reason for struggle has completely disappeared. This is reflected in the abnormalities that transpire outside of Maruki's palace. Every member of the Phantom Thieves struggled with past trauma as a result of the story's events. These events shaped them into who they became, but at the same time, they left a lingering feeling of regret behind. Each individual member of the Phantom Thieves sought out Dr. Maruki to confide their problems to, and when Maruki started his actualization project, they were the first to be forced into cashing in on his actualization. One example is Morgana, who was tormented by being the odd one out in the group. He is a cat-like creature in a group dominated otherwise by only humans. To boot, he also was attracted to Anne, a love that Anne could and would never reciprocate due to him not being human. His wish was to be human, to have a shot at courting Anne. Maruki's actualization turned Morgana into a human being, fulfilling his wish. However, his cat-like habits did remain, even after becoming human. Similar accounts apply to the other Phantom Thief members. Ryuji was never kicked out of the track team. Shio never attempted to take her own life, and thus was never transferred to a different school. Madarame reconciled with Yusuke and was transformed into the mentor Yusuke had always wanted him to be. Makoto never lost her father's life, nor her sister's affection. Futaba's mother was never assassinated, and Hao's father never lost a passion for his company, and as such was never killed by Akashi. However, they all remained as they had been after those events had transpired, and so after they had met Joker. More expounded upon than any of these is the case of Sumire Yoshizawa, Maruki's first patient and original victim. She and her older sister Kasumi were professional gymnasts, yet Kasumi bested Sumire at every event. Kasumi was the one who won prizes, who could stand atop the podium, whereas Sumire was relegated to merely watching his sister's victories. Over time, Sumire became jealous of her sister, and like every jealousy, it was born out of wishing to be someone else, to take over someone else's accomplishments and life, while maintaining your own identity. Sumire wished to be Kasumi, and then when Kasumi died in a car accident due to Sumire's own fault, Maruki actualized that reality for her. For the entirety of Persona's main story, Sumire is under the belief that her name is actually Kasumi Yoshizawa, and that her younger sister, Sumire, was the one who perished. Yet at this point in time, Maruki's control over the metaverse is limited to merely Sumire's cognition. All of the adults, including Sumire's own parents, still know her as Sumire, while the Phantom Thieves only think of her as Kasumi because they only know of her through Sumire. Even during the first awakening of her persona, Sumire maintains that her name is actually Kasumi Yoshizawa.
I am Kasumi Yoshizawa!
So adamant. Rather than accept a life in cinders, you'd strive towards splendor. You know the risks. Well, if those really are the shoes you've chosen, then we'll dance to the end.
Despite her altered cognition, Sumire fails to live up to Kasumi's performance. Her being in a supposed slump is an important leitmotif during her confidant meetings. Her athletic performance fails to live up to what it was prior to the passing of Sumire. Of course, this is because she never possessed that level of skill to begin with. Sumire's warped cognition tells her that she ought to be on the same level as Kasumi, rather than her own. Becoming Kasumi failed to resolve Sumire's inferiority complex. It only swapped out an exterior point of comparison for an interior one. It is no longer another person, but a past self who Sumire is failing to contest with. As such, Maruki's existential impotence is uncovered. Maruki can alter memories, he can bring back the dead, and change reality, and yet the human soul remains outside of his control. whenever someone is plucked out of the real world and thrown into their personally actualized reality, they are still the same person as they were prior to the actualization. Their personality, their trained skills, and their sense of life all remain the same. The concomitants of being prove to be absolute and resistant to interference. Maruki is unable to make Sumire become Kasumi. He can only alter her perception of herself to make her believe that she is Kasumi, due to essentially being Maruki's guinea pig. Sumire's case was limited to only her own memories becoming altered. Had his actualization succeeded, then everyone else would likewise be made to adopt Sumire's delusion, together with thousands of other actualized realities. Although Maruki lacks the ability to directly alter being, he can, through actualization, control one of the central being modifiers, that being memory. Man's mental apparatus functions as a result of the harmony between the two being modifiers, experience and introspection. Experience grants man his data, while introspection allows him to scrutinize the validity of both his experience and his conclusions. To give an example, a man who spends most of his free time reading novels may conclude every man spends his time likewise. This is the conclusion that experience would lead him towards, yet by introspecting he discovers that his own experience is insufficient to form a conclusion of such magnitude. Experience only gives man the material for his thinking, whereas introspection allows man to scrutinize and to judge the products of his thinking. The harmony between the being modifiers is thrown into disarray by Maruki's ability to alter memories through actualization. The purpose of introspection is to check the validity of one's experience. Experience cannot be contained as a concrete thing, however. An experience always occurs, but never is. Yet for the mind to function, the mind requires to be capable of storing experience in some concrete form. This is accomplished through memories, man's faculty of storing and maintaining experience as observable concretes. Without memorization, man would become unaware of his own experiences the moment after their passing, thus incapable of not only introspection, but concept formation as a whole. At the same time, this makes introspection fragile to memories that fail to recollect experience accurately, particularly Maruki's actualization, which can rewrite a person's every memory, dilutes an individual's grasp on reality. However, while this does give the impression of Maruki being able to change being, an individual is still not entirely severed from reality. Introspection contrasts not only experience with formed conclusions about reality, but also his sense of life. An individual's sense of life is the product of experience as much as any other content of his mind. So when his memories are changed to become unrepresentative of experience, introspection will become aware of this formed disparity between mind and memory. This dynamic is what allows Maruki's memory warping to be undone. Once the other Phantom Thieves were nudged by Joker to contrast their current existence with the memories of meeting Joker, Maruki's actualization swiftly unraveled. Their present selves, who they are as people, as well as their relationship with Joker, contradict their experience. Ryuji, for example, would not have become a delinquent had he not been kicked out of the track team. Consequently, he would have never met Joker. It was his suffering and the manner in which he chose to deal with it that led to him becoming a Phantom Thief. Without those circumstances, his present self would not be possible, and yet his actualized memories show him a different experience. The same thing applies for the other Phantom Thieves, all of whom discover, upon contrasting their selves with their memories, the glaring contradictions. Even in Sumire, who only came to her realization because Maruki directly told her, the incongruencies are visible through her supposed slump, though Maruki can alter the memories of his subjects, thus warping their knowledge of experience. His actualization remains impotent to prevent people from scrutinizing their own memories, and so his simulation falls apart. Ultimately, Maruki defends the fragility of his actualization only by telling the Phantom Thieves that they should have simply accepted his reality instead, to live in a reality they know to be fake, as people whose existence is a metaphysical impossibility. It is apt for his persona to be named Azathoth, the Lovecraftian deity in whose dreams all of reality was created. His waking up ends reality, just as Maruki's actualization crumbles the moment his victim recognizes the existential contradiction. Azathoth is the blind idiot god. Self-imposed blindness on the part of the victim is necessary for Maruki's ideal reality to persist.
This reality is the true reality. All you have to do is recognize it as such. Once you do, you'll be just as happy as they are.
The aim of Maruki's actualization is not to prevent further suffering, nor to eradicate those circumstances that would make humans suffer. Instead, it is to change man's brain to make man incapable on a psychological level of suffering. It laments not suffering, but man's ability to suffer. With this, Maruki forgets what it means to suffer, what is implied by that emotional state. Suffering exists as a contrast to failure, just as death exists to life. The death of a loved one, for example, only hurts precisely because it was that of a loved one. It brings with it the loss of a failure. This continues to hold true for other forms of suffering, such as a broken leg, an irreparable illness, or even something as seemingly insignificant as a hangnail, although the degree of loss differs between all of these examples. The presence of a harmed failure unites all three under the concept of suffering. Suffering is the emotional consequence of the destruction of a failure. As such, the ability to suffer is an inherent component of our faculty to failure, serving as an emotional reminder that the failure to safeguard one's values has death as its ultimate consequence. Furthermore, the attempt to gain a failure brings with it the risk of failure, which similarly leads to suffering due to knowledge of a decreased ultimate standard of life. In both of its aspects, as something to either gain or keep, failures and suffering are irreparably interwoven as each other's alternative. To reject man's ability to suffer is a direct rejection of values as such, and it follows that it is exactly one of his core values that Maruki hopes to abandon through his quest for a painless reality. At the advent of his scientific career in the field of cognitive science, Maruki's goals were limited to the alteration of the cognition of imprisoned criminals for the sake of more convenient rehabilitation. His point of focus was changed after his loved one, Rumi, witnessed the murder of her parents, leaving her cognitively dysfunctional due to severe PTSD. This made Maruki realize that preventing criminals from committing any future crimes does not erase the mental scars they already left behind in the past. A rehabilitated murderer still has murdered someone, a fact those close to the victim have to live with for the remainder of their lives. Maruki's solution only prevents the continuation of suffering, not suffering in the first place. He finds Rumi unable to cope with what happened to her parents until he, by accident, rewrites her cognition to make her forget about her parents' fate. Maruki concludes that he needs to use his power in order to take away sorrow from people, because people cannot overcome it on their own. That same sentiment is expressed by Maruki when he discusses Sumire's tragedy, as he states that one cannot expect her to be able to cope with the survivor's guilt. Then, during the final boss fight, he again says it must be impossible for Sumire to move on from her pain. The name of Maruki's palace also refutes this inability of his, being called the Laboratory of Sorrow, and even the free will seeds spread throughout his palace reveal the sorrow that Maruki feels. The song used for the final battle against Maruki, called Throw Away Your Mask, expands further upon this theme. This song expresses Maruki's viewpoint that humanity won't need to strive for greatness, and that man should instead let him take them to the place of the light, so that Maruki can give peace of mind to the whole world. Worrying about achieving one's goals only brings headache with it, whereas a mundane life of stagnation would be calm and peaceful. The same sentiment returns during the mental health check center portion of Maruki's palace. Here, patients are examined by a questionnaire to see what they will do in certain situations. But being part of a palace, which is a physical manifestation of its ruler's cognition, it reveals more about Maruki than the patients. The second question, for example, is about what to do when you are struggling with realizing your dream. Maruki's answer would be to give up for a new dream, rather than continuing to struggle. The final area of the palace is called the scientific model Eden, where the patients, whose cognition has been so-called improved, are stuck in a perpetual state of mindless laughter. The journey through the laboratory of sorrow serves as a physical projection of Maruki's counseling strategy, culminating in a state of mind embodied by the scientific model Eden. As the final area of the palace, this is what Maruki wishes to achieve with his counseling. To him, a successful job is to make the patient's worries dissipate, rather than being conquered. It is no coincidence that his final location is designed to resemble the Garden of Eden. Maruki's palace acts as a direct translation of Maruki's cognition into physical form, and as such, it reveals what is most important to him. Spread throughout the palace are several VHS tapes narrating past memories of Maruki, and at the end of the second one, a drunk Maruki is shown lamenting Rumi's loss. After rewriting Rumi's cognition, Maruki redirected his entire mind towards the helping of victims of crime and misery. He didn't grant himself the opportunity of properly grieving Rumi's loss. Instead, he left the matter unconsolidated, letting it linger on as an ongoing source of trauma. Maruki's belief that man lacks the willpower to overcome trauma can thus be attributed to his refusal to acknowledge his own. Consequently, the counselor sought to divorce men from their being rather than reconcile his own emotional troubles. Maruki's goal was to erase suffering from man's being so that he may avoid the suffering he otherwise would have to face himself. Then finally, once he was pushed to his limits by the Phantom Thieves, Maruki's persona evolves into the logical extreme of this premise, Adam Kadmon. In Judaism, Adam Kadmon is considered the pure potential of man, not held back by his physical vessel. Adam Kadmon exists in opposition to the Adam born in the Garden of Eden, which is made of loose material called a lump of clay. And Adam Kadmon instead is born in the image of God, as having no participation in any corruptible or earth-like existence. His Greek designation, Uranios Anthropos, or heavenly man, likewise refers to man as existing in a purely conceptual form. Adam Kadmon becomes Maruki's light that guides mankind towards its pure potential, a heavenly state with no physical presence. The designation of Adam Kadmon bears the ultimate implication of Maruki's longing to escape suffering. Man has to be saved of the physical and existential conditions that doom him to a flawed existence. Maruki has forgotten that to live means to experience the ultimate possibility of death, that to hold values means to risk losing them. When suffering as a potential is prevented, all access to value generation also becomes lost, and a man without his values is no man at all. And logically, the final battle is not a big showdown between the entirety of the Phantom Thieves and Adam Kadmon. That battle only serves to stop the realization of Maruki's plan to prevent him from ending all suffering. This defeat does not change Maruki's heart, as it fails to make him come to terms with his loss. Instead, the final battle takes place between Joker and Maruki on top of the cumbering palace. There is no access to persona, as both combatants lack any supernatural abilities. It's a simple fistfight between two men situated in reality, with his only purpose for Maruki to unleash his frustration. The only cure is a straight punch to his face. Reality finally caught up to Maruki, and the counselor is forced to admit his evasions. Everything has bottled up since Rumi's loss. All of his grief and self-deceit is released for one final scream. Maruki's revolt against reality was directed not at the stimuli for suffering, but instead at the man's emotional response, his emotional processing of that loss. This is ultimately all that suffering accomplishes, to make its recipient aware that harm has been inflicted upon them. Harm is all that degrades man's standard of living, that destroys or detracts from his values, either partially or completely. Suffering merely is a physiological, or in the case of pain, physical messenger of a degradation. As an occurrence, it is not something to be dwelt upon for its own existence, but to compel action. To portray suffering itself as a problem, as Maruki did, is to misrepresent its nature. Man has to accept the suffering in order to deal with its cause, as Maruki learns to do during his final fistfight with the main character. After his defeat and the destruction of the metaverse,
I get it
Maruki
now.
finally learns to grieve Rumi, and
Thanks
through
to
that
you.
is able to start rebuilding his life. He is only seen once more, working as a taxi driver and rebuilding his existence, having completely given up upon his utopian aspirations.